Hello, I'm Julian Whittle from Cumbria Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here with Malcolm Laidlaw of ML3 Technical Services to talk about the opportunities for Cumbrian food and drink businesses. Malcolm is an expert in food safety and in the quality systems and accreditations that food and drink businesses need to supply national and regional players such as Booths and the industry giants such as Tesco and McDonald's. Malcolm, we know that Cumbria is renowned for its produce and has some great food and drink businesses. Often they start small. I can think of Lynn Mallinson of Country Puddings, who began making desserts in her farmhouse kitchen, and she's grown now and is in her own premises. But how do they make the step up to supplying regional and national customers? Because often they maybe start with a farmer's market or selling to a specialist shop or whatever. How do they make that step up?
I think the first thing really that any business who is looking at becoming a bigger business or potentially supplying into somebody different be really to ask themselves, what do they want from it and why are they planning on doing it? It may seem a very good idea to supply into somebody like Tesco's or Asda or Morrison's, but when you actually start to look at the implications for your business, not just necessarily financial, but just the practicalities of it, I think the first thing that everybody needs to do is really look at their business. What are their strengths? What are they trying to do? And more importantly, do the maths. Make sure that the finances work out. What extra equipment do they need? What extra stock do they need to hold? What other challenges do they have? Do they need to have a certain level of certification, for example? What about things like shelf life testing and nutritional data? Do you actually need, rather than theoretical nutrition, do you need actual nutritional results, for example? So there's a whole host of things that you need to think about before you make that move.
We're going to talk about some of those in a minute, but what obstacles do SME food businesses face in meeting the procurement criteria of large organisations?
I think most large organisations will have a requirement for some form of certification. That's normally BRC, but could be Salsa for smaller businesses. I think the other challenges that a lot of businesses face is how many stores are they going to supply into, and what are the implications around distribution, for example, to actually achieve that.
Yes, because I originally came across a local business that was supplying into 50 Tesco stores, so you don't necessarily have to start supplying across the piece, do you?
No.
Ah, that's good. Now, all food businesses are required to have a hazard analysis and critical control point plan. How do they go about that?
It's a legal requirement that all businesses have a food safety management plan, of which HACCP is one of the versions of that. If you are a small catering style business, the chances are you'll have something like Safer Food, Better Business, and that will cover you for your needs. When you start to produce retail branded pre-packed products, you're more likely to go for some form of HACCP system in place. You really need to have an understanding of what it all means, so you need to go on some courses, for example, for it. You also need to have an understanding of your products, your processes, what potential hazards there are. So when we talk about hazards, we're normally looking at microbiological, physical, chemical, allergenic, but increasingly we're also seeing things like integrity and sabotage or vulnerability being included into a HACCP or as a separate bolt-on.
Okay. Let's look at accreditations. Firstly, Salsa, Safe and Local Supplier Accreditation. Malcolm, explain what it is and what are the benefits of having it.
Okay, so any certification is normally based on a standard. And a standard you can think of as an MOT for your business. So for an MOT for your car, you will take it to a garage and they will check that the brakes work, that the lights work, seatbelt works, for example. If you have something like Salsa, there are a list of clauses within there, and these are effectively questions that you need to demonstrate to the auditor that they're either not applicable to your business. For example, if you don't have meat on your site, then you can ignore all the questions about meat.
Yeah.
But if they aren't not applicable, then you have to provide evidence to the auditor that you meet the requirement of that standard. And it may be a simple thing like you've got a training record, so as long as you've got training records and they've been completed, that's ticking that box. It may be something slightly more complicated, so have you got HACCP? Have you got stock control? Have you got an incident management procedure in place? There's a lot of advice out there, both from people like Salsa and increasingly from BRC, and also from consultants to help you get through that process. The benefits of being certified is, from a buying point of view, the buyer will have some independent recognition that you are producing food to a safe and legal standard.
Will some retailers insist that you have Salsa, say, before they'll stock your product?
Certainly, if you are looking at any own-labelled product, it will be a minimum of Salsa and more likely to be BRC. If it's your own branded product, then it does really depend on that actual retailer and what your product is.
Okay, you mentioned BRC, which I think it stands for British Retail Consortium,
Yep.
is it? There's the BRC Global Standard for Food Safety. Can you expand on that one?
Okay, so this is the next step up from Salsa. So if you think about as a business first starting off, as long as you are keeping your environmental health officer happy and you're meeting all legal requirements, that's all you need to do. You then maybe go for Salsa standard, you then increase that up to BRC. It's a lot more in depth, it's a lot more requirements to it, and it takes into account a lot of other different aspects. So, for example, in BRC, there are specific clauses to do with new product development and food vulnerability. As a rough guide, a Salsa audit will take between half a day and a day and cost around £500. A BRC audit take 2 days as a minimum normally and cost somewhere between £1,500 and £2,000.
I wonder, do individual retailers, such as Marks and Spencer or whatever, do they have their own schemes as well as the national or international standards?
They do. Predominantly, they use their own schemes where you're manufacturing own label product for them, but they would be a higher standard than the BRC standard, and a lot of it comes down to brand protection for them.
I see. Now, let's talk a little bit about your role, Malcolm. How are you able to help food and drink businesses?
So my role as a technical consultant, I effectively sit on both sides of the fence. So I help businesses get through audits by putting in quality manuals. I also effectively am a technical manager for several small businesses, so I will answer complaints, I will help them with specifications, nutritional analysis, things like that. I also have my other hat on, that I'm an auditor, so I go out as a BRC auditor and actually audit factories.
Oh, right.
So I see things from both sides, which sometimes can actually help smaller businesses because they benefit from the knowledge that I gain when I'm dealing with bigger businesses and also from auditing and seeing best practice out there.
Okay. Now, I've always wondered how food producers determine the shelf life of their products.
There's no easy way to actually tell you how to determine your shelf life. You need to think about two things when you're looking at your shelf life. Food safety is number one, and then the organoleptic qualities of the product is number two. So in terms of food safety, we normally think of two types of food labelling, or two types of shelf life, if you like. One is a use-by date code, which is generally for short shelf life products that are kept in the fridge. These are predominantly products that have a high risk of microbial growth in them that could lead to food poisoning.
Right.
We also then have best before products. So these are generally ones that are either frozen or stored at ambient conditions. And these ones, generally microorganisms won't grow in them. And they will be perfectly safe for 10, 20, 30 years potentially.
Right.
But they may not taste right.
Right.
Okay. So again, things like a tin of tomato soup, you can perfectly safely eat that tin of soup 20 years down the line. Whether it would taste as good as soup that had been made or canned yesterday, that is questionable.
Right. Final topic I'd like you to talk about is food labelling. What are the requirements there?
Okay, so again, it's very much dependent on what your product is and where you're selling it. If you're a small business and the FSA class micro businesses as less than £2 million turnover, less than 10 people employed with you, and if you sell in the Cumbria County or within 30 miles of Cumbria, and by the way, you are also allowed to sell online, but as long as you're based in that area, then, for example, there's no specific requirement for you to have nutritional labelling on your products. As soon as you become either bigger than that business, employ more people, or if you sell outside of the 30 miles from the Cumbrian border, you then need to have nutritional labelling on.
Okay.
With regards to what other requirements there are, the main requirements would be covered under the Food Information for Consumers regulations. So this has a whole host of things, and it will cover the name of the product, the quantity, the size of the font you can use, what information you can actually describe on there, what's voluntary and what's mandatory.
Okay. And what are the consequences if you mislabel products?
I think we've all seen recent press over the last couple of months about a number of producers who have mislabeled products and the consequences that have happened from them. The FSA's view, certainly from an allergen point of view, is they will recall the product first and then deal with the issues afterwards. Other issues relating to shelf life and potentially swapping labels, for example, that would be a bit more tricky to determine what their course would be, but they are increasingly taking a strong view that recall and deal with the issue rather than letting it run on.
So get it right first time, I think, is the message,
yes.
isn't it? Yeah. That's great. Thanks very much, Malcolm.
No problem. Thank you.